understand that, but it was a difficult thing to pull off. But I did it, in fact, towards the end of my career with Cheshire County Council, I was also on UNISON's National Executive Council, which is, the senior elected council of the union, which is 60 strong from the whole of the country. But I always made up the time. I didn't take full-time release.
But did they or you not see it as a conflict that you were in a management role and yet a union member? At times there was a conflict, but I tried not to let it get in the way of what I thought was, the good ethos of the county council, which was to provide excellent services for the people of Cheshire. So, it was difficult at times, I have to confess, but we managed to do it. I also had good managers who understood that, provided I was doing the job as well as my union work. And to be fair, I stopped representing people about 20 years ago, so there wasn't the individual representation work that is involved for a lot of trade union officials. When you were at Cheshire, what kind of work were you doing? You weren't representing people individually. I take it wasn't a paid job you were doing within the union.
No.
So you were what?
I was an elected branch official, which meant that you got involved in local negotiations. I did communications work, I did policy work.
All in your own time?
Yeah, I represented the union regionally at a national level, and then eventually nationally with other unions. And
did you see that then as the way to go with your career, rather than staying within the business, if you like, working in the union?
Not really, but I mean, again, these things happen sometimes by chance.
Yes.
But UNISON is a big union, as you know, 1.3 million members, and it's got 12 regions. The biggest region is the Northwest, and the regional secretary, the senior full-time official,
this is a job you just retired from.
Is an appointed position. It's not an elected position. It's an appointed position, and UNISON, like any organisation, has got robust and transparent recruitment procedures. So they advertised for a regional secretary.
This was back when?
2003, I was with Cheshire. I loved my job with Cheshire. I had a very good job with Cheshire. So 2003, the job of regional secretary came up for the northwest of England, so I applied. And when I went for the interview, I was interviewed, strange, by 3 members of the NEC. Well, I was on the NEC, I was on the National Executive Council, so that was quite a difficult interview. Anyway, one of them said to me, "Why do you want to be a regional secretary?" I said, I don't want to be a regional secretary. I want to be the regional secretary for the northwest of England, my region, where I live, the region I love. And I got the job.
Just to explain what it is, it's a big region. You hinted at that. It stretches all the way up to the border.
It covers Cumbria, Lancashire, Cheshire, Merseyside, Greater Manchester.
And you've got how many members? You said so before, but how many?
200,000.
And it covers what areas? Education?
Education, local government, health, universities, police, civilians.
That's a heck of a lot.
It is. 71% women as well.
Really? What do you do then as regional secretary? Are you just making sure everything's working all right in union terms, or what?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because, everyone in the union thinks they can do it better than the regional secretary. It's like a lot of jobs. Okay, so you've got 90 plus staff, and they're what called mainly regional organisers, and they're out there supporting branches. There are 115 branches of UNISON. So, for example, Liverpool City Council will have a branch, the Liverpool City Council branch of UNISON, with, 5,000 members in. They'll have elected officials. So the full-time officials support those elected officials. And then, of course, we represent the union nationally. So, when there are big issues like the pensions dispute, I have to be sure that the voice of the Northwest region is heard in London.
It's a big job. Did you realise how big it was when you took it on?
Not really. And it's also a very political job, because we are affiliated to the Labour Party, but we're not part of the Labour Party. So whilst Labour was in government, which was for quite a significant part of the time that I was regional secretary, we had this, I don't know how to describe it really, it's a strange relationship, a critical friend maybe, that we liked a lot of what the Labour government were doing, but there were certain other things they weren't doing that we wanted them to do. So my job in relationship to the Labour Party was to take UNISON policy into the Labour Party, not to take Labour Party policy into the union, and that's difficult at times.
But were you doing that just for the Northwest and Northwest Labour Party or parties? Or
yeah, the relationship was partly with the Northwest, but then again, as a regional secretary of one of the biggest regions, you get involved in national stuff. So, for example, in 2009, we used to get a list of how many times we'd been to London, because obviously for the rail fare and the expenses and everything else. I'd been to London 68 times in 2009. 68 separate visits to London for various meetings and that, you know, spend a lot of time in the House of Commons. Because quite often, if you want to see a Labour MP from Liverpool or Manchester, your best chance of seeing them is in Parliament rather than in their own constituency.
Because they're down there most of the time.
It's where it all happens, Roger. Yeah. Everything happens in London. You soon learn that.
Yeah, and that makes your job as regional secretary even more important, because London is very London-centric in lots of ways, and it means you've got to make sure that the North West voice is heard.
You have to be known in London. You have to be known in the Strangers Bar in Parliament. You have to be known in various other places in London as the regional secretary for the North West. You know, you have to make those alliances, make it clear. And of course, the other difficulty for the North West region of England, I think other people in other fields will suffer from this, because of devolution. You know, there's a voice for Scotland, there's a voice for Wales, there's now a voice for Northern Ireland. All three of them are smaller in population terms than the North West. You know, I think we've got 7.5 million people live in the North West. There's less than that live in Scotland. They've got their own parliament. So the regional secretary for UNISON in Scotland, he goes to Edinburgh and Glasgow, he doesn't come to London. And that was a complication.
From what you're hinting at there, do you think that we should break up and have regional governments?
I was a supporter of regional government, yeah. I thought it would have given a voice for the North West, but it was clear that the general population didn't want it.
When you have a view like that, which is your own view, you can argue it within somewhere like UNISON, but in the end you have to argue what UNISON decides.
True. Yeah.
Do you find that difficult? Is that a difficult situation?
Not really, because for me, and this is a quote, it's not my quote, we had a General Secretary called Rodney Bickerstaff.
I remember Rodney Bickerstaff.
I call him a friend, I'm glad to be able to call him a friend. And Rodney's view was, it is a privilege to work for a trade union. It's not a job, it's a privilege. And he always reminded us of that. And he used to say, you're not there to represent your own views. You're there to speak for vulnerable people, for people who don't have a voice. And that was what I tried to do as a regional secretary, and a lot of other regional secretaries tried to do. Because, of course, you've got your own views, but, you're not there for that.
But the views of UNISON, when you were working with the Labour Party, or when the Labour Party was in government, it must have been relatively or easier to get across. Now, it must be much, much more difficult.
It was easier in some ways, but there's a higher expectation. You know, when Andy Burnham, for example, was the health secretary, we had a good relationship with Andy. And I've told this story before, that, I used to ask Andy about, privatisation of cleaning services in hospitals. And Andy would always give me an honest answer. He'd never fail to come back to me, but he wouldn't give us what we wanted. We did not want any privatisation of cleaning services in hospitals, and neither did our members. Not just in terms of, a selfish interest of protecting their own jobs. They thought it was the wrong thing to do.
It was proved to be the wrong thing to do. The Royal have now taken them back in-house.
Yeah. So we had an uneasy relationship at times with the Labour government, because we always wanted more, and the main more we wanted was less privatisation of the NHS.
A very different story with the coalition. Is that partly why you're retiring?
No, I'm retiring for selfish reasons, because I thought it was the right time for me to go and for someone else to come in and take it. It's one of the few things you have some control over, isn't it? The day you can actually go. Not everyone has that control, but...
did you find it frustrating working?
Very much so. And, this bill that's going through Parliament now, the Health and Social Care Bill, I do believe we'll see the end of the NHS as we know it. And there's not much we can do about it. They've got a majority in Parliament. The Lib Dems have been cowardly, I think, and have sacrificed some of their beliefs to remain in power. Shirley Williams made a fantastic speech in defence of the NHS, but was done very little in the House of Lords to vote against what's going through.
But remember, Labour started this movement that has just been accelerated by Andrew Lansley.
True. I've had that thrown back at me many, many times. I did a debate with John Pugh, the Lib Dem MP for Southport, against the bill, and his first response was, well, you started it. So, yeah, we have to accept that.
But it's not something you approved of when Andy Burnham was the Health Secretary?
Absolutely no.
How do you react when people say, and it's clear everyone's just listened to you, that this isn't true, but the many people on the right certainly will say, bloody unions are running the country, too powerful, what's their business, stay out of it.
Yeah, we used to get a lot of that, and, without wrapping it up, we used to get it from journalists as much as we did from, Conservative or Lib Dem politicians, and, I wish I had a pound for every time a journalist opened up a conversation with, well, is this a return to the winter of discontent? It's as if they must learn that in journalism school, that, you have to ask about the strike first. And so much of what we've done, or I've been involved in a trade union, is not about disputes. You know, it's been about campaigning for better services. It's been about defending individual people who've been outdone by. It's been about, I don't know, issues that most members of the general public would support, and yet the stereotypical view